Why am I doing this? When I reached my 81st year a few days ago, I did realize that there were stories that were going to go with me, and I thought, would someone benefit from that? So it actually dawned on me, maybe in fact some among you would like to hear about something that maybe you wouldn't have heard otherwise. So that's sort of the crux of why I'm here, and we're going to do that by going back in time with Ram Dass, and then in later times, some of the more personal interactions that I had with him. But just to begin, it's ironic in a way that I get an introduction because Ram Dass never got introductions. It'd be 3,000 people, he'd just wander out on the stage and he'd start fiddling with the chair, and he almost like he didn't know anyone was there. And then finally he'd sit down, and after a little while, he would start somewhere like saying, you know, it's interesting that, and you'd feel like you missed something because he's sort of almost like he started in the middle of a sentence, and you knew you were off and running. It was like you were talking to him in a living room. It really was. So it's different to have a introduction. So anyway, so we're going to go back in time, if you will, and to give you context on what we're doing is I'm going to start like in 1970. It could have been 65, could have been 70, but I'll just use 1970 because that's when I arrived in California. And at that time, this is a tricky thing to do, but you need to go from realizing that today we have all these facilities, books and teachers and retreats and internet, all of these things, and you really take it for granted. But if you go back to 1970, we didn't have that. We really didn't. There was a few magazines, there was radio. There wasn't a lot, but there were a lot of psychedelics. There was a lot going on. There was a lot of awakening. And I use that word limitedly in that they were awakening to what? What were they awakening to? And honestly, no one knew. Look at Woodstock. Look at the Ken Kesey bus rides. Look at Haight-Ashbury. They were mostly feeling the awakening. They were feeling it. But with few exceptions, they really couldn't define what it was. So mostly it was an explosion of energy, and a lot of damage even occurred. And not that it wasn't a glorious time in Haight-Ashbury and all the stuff going on, but if you reflect back, there wasn't a lot of knowing about exactly what it was they were awakening to. I was there, and we didn't know. We just knew this feeling, and to our credit, you were following this instinct, but you weren't sure why. And into the scene comes Ram Dass, first Ram Dass, and then the book Be Here Now. And many of you here, and certainly you've heard about it, the book Be Here Now was transformative in that it explained the journey that others were feeling, so they were having these huge ahas. It's okay, this is the basic primer for Eastern spirituality, and I'm starting to get some sense of what this journey is about. And Ram Dass was the great explainer. That's my own term because that really hits it for me. He was the great explainer. He was a fabulous explainer. So in order to get some context in that, I don't want to do a whole bio of Ram Dass. You can read about him, but you do need some background, which I'll quickly go over so you know who he was. And he was born Richard Albert in Massachusetts from a very affluent family. Highly educated, went to undergraduate at Tufts and his master's at Wesleyan, and finally his doctorate in psychology at Stanford. So he had arrived, and then after brief teaching in Stanford, he was hired to go in the psychology department at Harvard. So when he's at Harvard, in his mind, he had arrived. He really had arrived. He had a big office. He had a sports car. He had his own airplane. he was there, man. He was riding, and he was a professor, and, he did the parties, and he was very erudite. His name Richard Albert, that was his name. And he did a lot of good work at Harvard, and until down the hall, a friend of his also in the department, one Timothy Leary, turned him on to psilocybin. And he took psilocybin for the first time, said he saw more in 8 hours he'd seen in his entire education. So he and Timothy Leary began to do all sorts of experiments with LSD. It was legal at the time, all under the auspices of Harvard, and there were other experiments in LSD going on all over the country. In Stanford, Ken Kesey was in the first LSD experiments at Stanford, and he had never taken a drug or drunk alcohol. And it turned out it was a CIA-sponsored thing, but Ken Kesey had never done drugs when he took acid in experiments. So it was around because it was legal, and they thought that it was a panacea. It was only a matter of getting it right, putting enough at the right time, the right formula, and you would be enlightened. I mean, it sounds crazy now, but they thought that was it. And so it was all about that. So they did a lot of experiments, some of the first ever blind studies at Harvard. But ultimately, both he and Timothy Leary were fired from Harvard for supposedly giving LSD to an undergraduate against some kind of agreement. It may or may not be true, but they were fired, and off they go, continuing their experiments, and primarily at Millbrook, a big mansion in upstate New York, which they took massive amounts of LSD and did workshops and started foundations. They knew how to do it. And by the way, there's a Ken Kesey movie, if you haven't seen it, it's called Magic Trip. I saw it the other night. And at the end of the trip, they end up in Millbrook, and they meet this guy, Richard Albert. Isn't that funny? And he's holding forth like he's a professor, and they couldn't care less because they're just dropping acid and just raising hell. So there's this weird sort of a moment there between the two. So that's the picture. So after a period, Richard Albert became disillusioned with the drugs because no matter how they took them, how much they took, or how they took them, one thing was always true. They came down. They always came down. But when they were on the drug, they had this distinct feeling there were people out there who didn't take drugs who were always that way. And they referred to them as those who know. Those who know. And they would refer to those who know. So ultimately, Richard Albert is disillusioned. He goes off to travel the world, ends up in India, meets this guy Bhagwan Das, a hippie kid from Laguna Beach, and they travel around, and Bhagwan Das introduces Richard Albert to his guru, Neem Karoli Baba. And Ramdas, Richard Albert, wanted nothing to do with it. He really saw himself as an atheist, couldn't care less, but he meets this Indian guru, and the guy essentially blew his mind. He knew what he was thinking about the night before. He told him about his mother. One thing and another, Ramdas is blown away and stays there and takes teachings for many months until Maharaji, as they called him, basically kicked him out. So it's time to go. It's time for you to go home. It's time for you to go to America. So back he comes carrying a manuscript that he had written, and he goes to the Lama Foundation in Taos, New Mexico with a manuscript, and the people there put together the graphics, and basically they put together Be Here Now, which came out as a loose leaf, kind of a box full of stuff, and then ultimately the book. And Michael's been kind enough to bring one of the old copies. We have a little display over here of Ramdas stuff, and we have a Be Here Now copy. And came out in the familiar blue book that's now sold over 2 million copies. And it's still around, still in print today. And so that's how it came about. So let's go skip on up here now. And how did Ramdas do it? What was different about him? And this to me, if you say, there are some personal things I want to share with you, but This to me is the nuance of what I most would like to impart, and the most difficult to impart. It's sort of like, who was Ram Dass? Why was he who he was? Number one, he was not a guru. He was not a guru. He never said he was a guru. And all the years I knew him, I never thought of him as a guru. I never knew anyone who thought of him as a guru. There are a lot of people who saw him as a guru, mostly people who weren't around him. They just were looking for someone, and Ram Dass becomes that. But he himself did not present himself as a guru. In fact, he became very anti of those who were saying they were enlightened beings. He could be tough in that regard. So he wasn't a guru. And so how did he impart the information to people that made him so popular among them? And he explained it, that he was like everyone else. He was on this journey of awakening, just like you and me. He was on the same journey, and that we were all just walking each other home. It's just that his particular job, his karma, was explaining the journey. He could have been a mailman or whatever, but his job just happened to be using his life, the things that he was going through, what he was learning, to share with others who were doing the same. And he was totally laid back. So picture, and I'm just using California, but it was all over the United States. He was a totally laid back dude. He would have like this fabric bag over his shoulder, never had a roller bag, he always carried everything, very kicked back t-shirt, and he was just kind of around. There was no entourage, there was no airs that he put on, there was no hiding. He was out there. He would be at Grateful Dead concert. He'd be at the Westport the Jazz Festival, Newport Jazz Festival. He was all over the place. He just was kind of around, and you might see him anywhere. And he would speak before large groups. But he was like we were traveling with him, and he once said that Ram stood for rent-a-mouth. So that's sort of what he was. He was the mouth. He was the mouthpiece. And he was a master of being the mouthpiece. And that's why we go back and look at his bio and his history. He was a suave, erudite dude. I mean, he could mix in any crowd. The most sophisticated people to the hippies of Haight-Ashbury. He was comfortable across that. But because of his really professor background, he struck an imposing pose. And he could speak very articulately to psychological groups or to some church or anywhere else, and ultimately people all over the world. And he did it by telling fantastic stories. He was just a master storyteller. And let me see where I was here. People would go to hear him talk just to hear the stories. And there are stories that if you were hanging out with Ram Dass, you'd heard at least a dozen times. and so when he'd start the story, instead of you feeling, oh, he's telling that story, you'd start smiling. I know this one, it's a great story. And he would embellish it and tell it a little differently. And people loved to hear his story, and he loved to laugh, and he loved humor. And he fed off of the audience. And this is really interesting to me because if you think of like the Grateful Dead, they're famous for these endless numbers and the people dancing for hours on end, and people think like the Grateful Dead were playing to the crowd. No, the Grateful Dead were feeding off the crowd. They were putting the crowd's vibes to music. It was the sound of the crowd. So as the crowd built, so did the music. And that's the way a lot of that music was, certainly the Grateful Dead, and that's the way Ram Dass was. When he's teaching among 2,000 people, or however he's doing it, he is giving them what they're asking for. And he was constantly using the term, are you hearing this? Are you hearing this okay? And that meant, are you understanding it? So if it's a big crowd, there's thousands of people, he's saying that and he's picking up, are you ready for the next, I think maybe I can take you, we can go a little more here. Are you hearing this? And you could see the crowd going with him. And he would, you would feel like he was talking to you. And he would say, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. And it sounds like just a flippant statement, but it absolutely is true. And what is true is, and it's true for everybody in this room, we see and feel things that we haven't brought into consciousness. They're swirling around. They're a little cloud. They're kind of not quite formed. And he would name that because he was feeling it in himself. And your light would come on. I hear that. And it would validate your journey. And that's what he was doing. One time, years later, I had not seen him for several years, and I actually felt like I had sort of moved away from Ram Dass. I was seeing things, I was taking a turn. I wasn't rejecting anything, I was opening in a different way. I was feeling the path was turning a little bit for me. And I really felt like I didn't need to go to see Ram Dass, but I went for nostalgia and because it was so much fun. It was like a party, it always was. Went on, he'd talk, and then Krishna Das or somebody would chant for hours, and then there'd be more. Sometimes they'd go on for hours. They were like a happening. At any rate, I go to the event, and I'm kind of listening, a little bit distracted. And at some point during the evening, he said he was now feeling this feeling that the path was, and he hit it right on the nose of what I had been feeling. It just blew me away. I mean, think about that, how validating it is that you think that you're not in this, you're over here now, and the speaker says, this is where I'm seeing it now. And it was just like, holy mackerel. And then your eyes pop open and you really feel like he's just talking to you. And he did that. He had these famous one-liners. He was quite well known for his one-liners. And there's a whole book, we have one over there, and it's a whole book of one-liners over here, and there's not one in there that was one of mine. and none of the ones I had were in that book. So everybody had their one-liners. But for me, a few of them that really stayed with me, that were important for my own personal journey, was the term grok. And that term actually comes from Stranger in a Strange Land, I think a book from the 80s. Excuse me, I hate the way it's cracked. So grok, Ram Dass described grok. One night I heard him do it, and it took him 10 minutes. He went through a whole bit. It's in your brain, it's swirling around, it's in your mouth, and he's gargling, and he's saying it's swishing it around. This concept's in your mouth, it's going down your throat, it's into your intestines, and finally it's out to your extremities, and you have grokked it. You now have that concept, you don't have to revisit it, it's now you're part of it, and that's grokking. And that was super important for me because I really felt like I had grokked a certain aspect, and I didn't revisit it. I was ready for the next because I've grokked that. And then another one that I particularly like was when he would say that all of life is grist for the mill of your awakening. He did a lot talking about the physical plane, the importance of that, but he would use the term grist for the mill of your awakening. All events in your life, good, bad, were there as fuel for your awakening. Like the grist that goes into the mill to make the bread, the events in your life go into you to make your enlightenment. So around the Ram Dass circles, you would you might lament some sad story to your friends, and they would kindly say, grist for the mill. And he talked a lot about the importance of your incarnation. While some more guru types, they're talking from up here, you need to get to this place. He would talk about you have to honor your incarnation. And so he would shorten that. The one-liner was, you have to remember your zip code. So he just lived with these one-liners, and they were like, religion to me. I had tons of them, and they were important to me. And he spoke an awful lot about the importance of living your incarnation, and that the only thing you could share with another being was your being. All the rest was bullshit. In other words, you're sharing your being with another being, and that's what's really happening. And this really, this is like, are you hearing this? Because I'm going to give you another one here as well. So is everybody hearing this? Because he would say that just because he would say there's nothing in and of itself that is either spiritual or other than spiritual. Only the nature of the being. They weren't spiritual acts and not spiritual acts. They were just the nature of the being doing it. So in his words, you could be a great, generous giver of something, or you could be taking care of a dying person, and all the while you are in essence ripping them off for their energy of appreciation and you feeling good about yourself. You want the accolades. So you have done this, looks like, on the surface as a, quote, spiritual act, when in fact you were just another ego trip. So, and another thing you might do that was nothing like that, and you were totally a spiritual being. All my life, the things that Ram Dass said, I've thought about, you see the guy driving a bus or doing whatever, and he could very well be this enlightened being. I really feel that, And he said that it's better to be the teaching than the teacher. Doesn't mean being a teacher isn't a great thing. It's just that the act of teaching can be in itself a trap. You start to think that's who you are. Whereas if you are just being the teaching, then that's probably a better route. He wasn't making one wrong or the other. He was just saying, that's really a better way to go if you be the teaching, be the example of it. Be the example of it. So, just to move along, so about that time I'm living in Big Sur, in a trailer, and we had a tent, a sleeping tent, and I was a leather craftsman. And fake it till you make it. And living under the redwood trees of Big Sur, and the first time I saw him, it was a big event in Berkeley. And I was just blown away. I'd just never been around anything like that, the chanting, him talking. I'm this straight guy, from back east. And so, but I was really blown away by it. I just knew that's, my guy. And we would hang around in our trailer in Big Sur, and we did our leather crafting, and we listened to these tapes, these little Ram Dass tapes that we can talk about. And so we learned more and more about Ram Dass. And one day we were hanging out in the trailer, having this little talk, and we would say things like, when do you think you'll be enlightened? And somebody would say, I think maybe like 6 weeks. And I remember I felt much more humble. I said, no, man, I think it's going to be 6 months. I mean, we didn't know, man. We just thought this journey has an end. We're going to be there. So anyway, so there was confusion. So I remember standing by the window in my trailer and saying that if I had only one wish in the world, it would be to be a student of Ram Dass. And people said, why? Student, why? What? I say, well, because, if we're trying to figure out what it is that's going on, I'd like to be with the heaviest dude I know, and that's Ram Dass. We talked that way. Heaviest dude. That was like 70. So I'd said, if I had only one wish. So lo and behold, a few days later, a week or so, Ram Dass is coming to Esalen, the famous retreat center in Big Sur. And so if you were local, you could go down to the hot baths at like the middle of the night, like after 1 a.m, you could go to the baths. So the locals in Big Sur, they'd go down to the hot baths, after 1 a.m. or something. So we would trek down to the hot tubs, and then we'd go into Esalen. We'd leave a note for Ram Dass. Please come see us. It was my partner. And I said, will you come to the campground? We'd leave these freaking notes, and then we'd go back. We'd go back and wait all day to see if he showed up. I don't know what we were expecting. We had no phone. I don't know what we were expecting. So after a few days, we began to think, well, man, he's going to leave. He's going to be leaving. We got to do something. So we just got in the car and we drove down to Esalen. We walked right into we had no right to be there. And we walked right into the dining room. And Ram Dass was standing in line to eat. And we walked up and said, Ram Dass, we were Paul and Lynn. And he turned around and said, Paul and Lynn. A big bear hug. It wasn't as good as Maggie's or some of the people here at CCLD, but it was a hell of a hug. And it was like a big bear hug with both of us, and then he did this breathing thing. He just brought the tongue, and just like he was bringing it all down, and it's like he was just right in the middle of the cafeteria. It's wild. Whew! Didn't mean to do that. Then he went all the way out to his car and got some beautiful album he had and gave it to us, and we were on our way. So that was our first meeting of Ram Dass. And then I get recalled to Pan American. 1976, I head back to New York, going back to Pan Am. I hadn't been out of the state. I hadn't been in a building. I hadn't seen a television. I didn't have a telephone. I had not been anywhere for 5 years. I had a beard, hair down to my shoulders. I wore handmade shirts, and I was a hippie leather craftsman. Believe me, I fit in. I had the uniform. I looked the part. So anyway, I head back to New York, back to Pan Am, and I'm on the other side of Kennedy Airport, way out on Long Beach. I think it's where like The Godfather took place or something. Way out there. And it was a hard transition. I had a hard time. It was a hard transition. There's not much ceremony. You just back in training, and here I am, and I'm pretty screwed up. And I read in a magazine, they had a lot of magazines in, New Age Journal, East West Journal, Yoga Journal, there were a lot of them. And I read an article that started out, I've been following you from this is an interview for Ram Dass. They were interviewing Ram Dass, picture on the front page. And the lady who was interviewing said, Ram Dass, I've been following you from New York to Boston to Martha's Vineyard. You're very hard to find. And he said, yes, but when you find me, you've got me. And I go, what? You mean I could be? That include me? And it was like the lights went on, man. I said, I never thought of that. Could I see, hang, sit down? And so I set about to find Ram Dass. And Scorton, you'll say, I can be determined. And I do not know. I didn't know a soul in New York. I do have no idea how I found him. I even asked Krishnadas if it was him, and he said he was in India. So I don't know how I found him, but I got an appointment with Ram Dass on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and went to see him, and sat down in it was an apartment with very little in it, and the room had nothing but pillows, and we sat on pillows, about knee to knee, sitting on the pillows, Ram Dass, me. And Ram Dass is sitting in the full lotus position, and I'm in the not full lotus position. and so I'm asking him these meaningless questions, and no matter what, he had huge eyes, and he would close those eyes, And he would always go inside. He never gave flippant answers. He never said, that's a stupid question. He would go inside, no matter how mundane the question was, he would give you an answer. And so this went about maybe 30, 40 minutes. I do not remember one single word spoken, not one. And then he said, closed his eyes, and he said, so I think that's about it. And I am telling you, something rose in me. I do not know where it came from. But I just started saying, no, 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 it's not. I'm supposed to get something. I'm supposed to get something and I haven't gotten it. It was like the exorcist. Oh, I've got it. I just went off. I really did. I hadn't thought about it. I hadn't planned it. I didn't know it was coming. It just came. And I started saying, I'm supposed to get something and I haven't gotten it. And he closed his eyes for the longest time, and he opened his eyes and said, I'm starting a small class. All I said was, please, oh, please, oh, please. I just kept saying, oh, please, oh, please. And he said, you come next Tuesday, we're meeting at 7 o'clock, and he said, we'll know, you and I, whether you should be there or not, but you come next Tuesday. So I go to the class, and there were 7 people. 7 people came, and I think 2 of them were gone in about 5 minutes. And he laid out the rules that this class would meet every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. without fail. You could never miss the class or don't come back. No excuses. If you had a dire emergency, you could call him and discuss it with him. But otherwise, you do not miss. You do not tell anyone you're in this class. Not your best friend. Your spouse, maybe. No one is to know about this class. And finally, you couldn't tell anyone what you were learning in the class. Like if you were teaching somewhere, you're teaching yoga or something, you cannot teach what you're learning here. And that was all of that made perfect sense. It was like planting a tree. He wanted it to blossom, but he didn't want you blasting it out there somewhere. And the secrecy was that if anyone knew, all hell would break loose. They would come from all over the world. It would be chaos. And it turned out, when he decided that he was going to take students, he decided that he would not tell anyone he was going to, and he would leave it up to God to give him a sign. So can you imagine this klutzo comes in there and says, no, I'm supposed to get something. And whereas I think he's going to talking to God, he's really saying, no, you got to be kidding me. Not, he's not this guy. So, and as far as I know, and I've never heard this refuted, only one time in his entire life did Ram Dass take students. He had workshops. I was at Naropa with him for 6 weeks. There were many things where he had workshop students, but never did he take personal students or have an ongoing class, but one time only, and I walked in the door. Now, remember Big Sur? One wish I had in the world. Blows my mind. It was the greatest blessing of my life. So for the next year and a half, I was flying with Pan Am, and I never missed a class. I even slept on the floor once in my uniform because I had to fly the next morning. And he taught us no socializing. The class built up to maybe 30, 40 people. No socializing. You came in 7 o'clock, you started meditating, and we worked hard. Every type of thing he had ever learned, heavy-duty breathing techniques, mantras, secret mantras that Guru had given him, chanting, and of course he would talk. And he was the top of the world then, so picture would be on the front page somewhere, and we get the inside skinny, and he's over here, he's over there, and so we were sort of getting the inside story on all this stuff was going on. And the class worked really, really hard for a year and a half. And during that time, as I say, I kept flying. And also during that time, how are we doing on time speaking? Oh, we're doing good shape. During that time, I was driving to where I was living up near Danbury, Connecticut, and I would drive past the Danbury prison. And I said to my wife at the time, and I didn't know why, I said, it seems like I've got some work there. That's a Ram Dass term too. I think we have some work together. You know, do you have any work together? That sort of thing. So I said, you know, it feels like I've got some work there. And I would just, so I saw a little thing in one of the spiritual magazines said, give $6 and these inmates can get a free subscription because they can't afford it and you can pay for it. So I said, okay, well, that's what I do. And there was one that said Danbury Prison. I said, oh, $6, I'll send it to him. So I bought it, and then I thought, well, you know, his name was there. I'll write him a letter. Tell him, is there any way I can help you? So I write a letter to this guy, and Joseph Mirabile, I remember his name. I wrote a letter to him and essentially said, you know, I'm on this spiritual journey, if I can help you, you know. And I get back this letter that I had to look carefully. I thought Ram Dass wrote it. I mean, it was like, whoa, this guy had been doing inner work. He was like, this was some heavy duty stuff. You know, he was really a clear dude. And then after a couple of letters, he said, I put you on the visitors list and come to see me. Whoa, I'm going to, so I go to Danbury Prison, never been in prison in my life. And I go into the visitors thing, and you just sat on chairs like this. There were guards, but you weren't behind the wall or anything. You were sitting right facing him. And I was talking to him, and this guy walks up, and he introduces me as the guy's prison psychologist. And George Seinfeld is still my friend today. And so he was a psychologist, and he told the guard that that Joseph could stay there by himself because he was going to show me around. So he shows me around this prison, and I'm walking around this prison. It's all-men prison. They have 4 big dorms, and so like 90 men in a dorm, and they have just bunk beds, and a big shower, a rec room, and a huge rec yard. And so I'm walking down the hall, and I walk by this library, and he points out the library, and I thought, oh, that's it, the library. And I said, so I could get you some books for the library, you know, holy books. I can get you some holy books. And he said, no, I want you to come here and teach. He could have not teach. I never thought of teaching in my life, man. Oh my God. So I didn't know what to say, man. There was a part of me, you know, we all feel like we want to share the good that we've learned. We want that. We feel it in our hearts. We could do that. I could do that, you know. And so, but my God. So I go off the next class after class, and I go to Ram Dass, and I say, Ram Dass, you know, these people want me to come teach at Danbury Federal Prison. And I'm waiting for him to say, are you kidding me, you klutz? You can't, you know. But he lights up, oh, that'd be good. That'd be really cool. You ought to do that. So he said, yeah, go ahead and do that. That'd be great. And so I said, well, do you have any advice? And he said, yeah, you have to be very honest with those guys because they'll pick up on bullshit really quickly. So you got to be very honest. Turned out to be good advice. And then I said, what about what I've been learning from you in here? And he said, you can teach them anything you learn in our class. I got the green light. You know, and to my knowledge, no one else had that. There was no one else teaching in the prison in our group. So for the next year or so, I would fast every Tuesday till Thursday morning. That was my routine. I'd go to Ram Dass Tuesday night, and I'd fast all day Wednesday, and I'd go to my prison class on Wednesday night and channel Ram Dass to the prisoners at Danbury Federal Prison. And we had a great time. I mean, they'd tell them all about Ram Dass, because, you know, they couldn't go tell anybody. And I had Joseph Goldstein. Joseph Goldstein came by, and Jack, what's his name from the... Cornfield. Yeah, he and Jack Cornfield and Joseph Goldstein came the same night. They drove all the way down from Barre, Massachusetts, to my class one night, and that was a big thrill for the guys. So anyway, that was a part of it. And then, so after a year and a half, we had moved up to Paulding, New York, on a beautiful estate of this big restaurant owner, and we had the guest house. And I told Ram Dass that's where I was living. So along about August of 77, he announced that he was going back to India and having the last class the next weekend, and we're having it up at Paul's place. Okay, we're going to have it up at Paul's place. So last class of Ram Dass here, they come, and Ram Dass tells us he'll have lunch with us, and then the class meet in the yard. So as a leather craftsman, he's coming up there, and I had made, by then I was a pretty good leather craftsman, and we had created these leather appointment books. And Jack Nicholson had one. I made gifts for Clint Eastwood. I was known in the Big Sur area, but I hadn't done it in a couple of years. I'd laid that aside, but I had never made one for Ram Dass. And I wanted it to be the grand, my grand hoopah. So I proceeded to work on this book. I got out all my tools, and I worked all night long on this book. And the whole time, I'm operating under the thought that Ram Dass is totally capable of thanking me graciously for this book and handing it to the person right next to him, and my precious book is gone, So with that thought in mind, all night long, I'm saying, be in the moment. This is the reward. The doing is the reward. This is the reward. And it's like the potter becomes the pot. And I became the book. And I worked all night on that thing. I was doing Hanuman, the monkey god that was part of Ram Dass's lineage. And I worked on that thing, and all of a sudden the sun was up. At any rate, the next day he had lunch with us, and I gave him the book. We go out in the yard, and all the class is meeting. We have the class. And sometime during the class, he brings up the book, and he holds it up. And he said all of the things that I always wanted him to say about me. We want that, What a good person. If he says it, maybe it's true. And he talked about exactly, without my ever having told him, this is what it's like when you do something out of total love. So he says everything I wanted to hear, and I couldn't care less. I was done. It was the weirdest experience. I really was just watching. I didn't take anything in. I just sort of listened. That was it. And the picture of that book's right there. And the picture of him holding it's over there. And there's a very rare picture on the far right of the class in New York. I don't remember anyone ever taking that, to tell you the truth. But that is the only picture I've ever seen, but that was the class in New York City. And there are others over there. There's a picture of the retreat in Rhode Island. I'm actually in that picture. I didn't know it until after I printed it. I'm on the very, very far right. I remember the death and dying lady, Kubler-Ross. She was there. It was up in Rhode Island, and he comes to a 5-day retreat. So it's 350 people. And so we start the retreat, and Ram Dass said, this retreat will be in total silence, and no one will speak till the end of the week. So we're there for 5 days and no talking. You could ask a question when you were in that thing, but otherwise no interaction, no talking. So that picture's up there of that retreat. And then the other picture is from Maui after he'd had his stroke, and I'm talking to him in Maui. So, okay, I've kind of moved along here. I don't even know what time it is. So, oh yeah, we're good. Okay. So I'm just going to finish up, and then we're going to have questions. After the class ended, that really was the period where I most interacted personally with Ram Dass, because now I knew him, and he always treated me as a friend, and him as a friend, but I always saw him as my teacher. And over the period, let's say from 77 up through maybe 95, I saw him many, many times. I produced 2 events in New Haven. He stayed at my house. And after the event, we'd have a beer. I'd pick him up and drive him there. And one time I was walking down the street in New York. I was living in New Haven, and I was visiting friends, and I was walking down the street in Manhattan, and I hadn't seen Ram Dass in a long time, and I saw a payphone. I thought, I think I'll see if he's down. So I called the number I have from Ram Dass. He answers the phone, and I told him I was in town. Could I come see him? Yeah, come on up. So, go up there and you just hang out for 2 hours, and it's just you and Ram Dass. And that happened. I was out in California. I did the same thing. He was living in Marin County. And he said, yeah, come on over. I'll take you to dinner. So I went over and picked him up, and we went out to dinner. And we had many times where we shared dinners together, traveled together, lots and lots of different situations. I was with him in his home and out there and in my home. So, like I said, it was some 125 times probably that I was with him. And if I missed anything, I think I missed, if anybody missed anything. So I think I've about giving you everything I can give you. So let's see, the times we were together. Well, there was some story I wanted to tell you. I can't remember what it was. Well, it'll come to me, but I can't remember it right now. But he just loved humor. He loved humor. And I have a type of humor, some of you know, that it just comes out. It's not filtered. And sometimes it's really funny. Sometimes probably shouldn't have done it. But I hear it at the first that you heard it. I don't hear it until you hear it. It just comes out. And I would be with him, and we'd be in some situation, and one of my statements would come out. I would not get the last syllable out before he'd be laughing. He got it immediately. It was sharp as a tack. And he would pick up on it immediately. And he'd get a big laugh, and then maybe he'd say, oh, Paul. He would do some number like that. But it was almost like I said what we both were thinking, and I just said it, So he loved to laugh. So the last time I saw him was, well, it wasn't the last time I saw him. We had, after his stroke, I saw him a few times. I saw him in Maui. I saw him in Tucson, San Francisco, Taos, and Zoom calls. He used to have this thing called heart to heart, and it's only if you knew about it. It wasn't advertised. But if you knew about it, you could send in a request for a heart to heart with Ram Dass. It might be 4 or 5 months later you get this notice. 7 o'clock Tuesday night, are you free? And the Zoom would ring. It wasn't Zoom in those days, and there would be Ram Dass. And you'd just hang out with him for an hour, just you and him. And so I would always put my name in, and so I had a Zoom call with him once. And it was supposed to be 45 minutes, and it was an hour and a half. And my wife, Jan, and I. And so she had cancer, and so he was counseling her about her cancer. And we're going along. We've been talking to him for an hour. And out of nowhere, he says, I found out I have a son. Have you ever had somebody say something that's just so far out, you just say, well, that's nice. I mean, it's like someone saying, I just got back from Mars. You go, oh, that's nice. I said, I didn't know what to say, man. I said, oh, that's nice. And then the very next thought was, oh my God, the stroke. I didn't realize that it had gotten him. It's the stroke, because I never heard of that. And so he talked about it for a minute. It turned out the guy lived in North Carolina. He didn't know about him. He had an affair with a woman when he was in college in Stanford. She had a child after he had left. She never told the child, And after the guy had grown, had children, his children began to recognize he looked like Ram Dass. Ultimately, his children contacted Ram Dass. They actually did a DNA test. It was his son. And Ram Dass, was not very, he was happy about it, but he says he's a very nice man. he's a straight banker, you know. It wasn't like, you know, a long lost son, but I think they came out and saw him, and they saw one another periodically. And so that was a interesting time. So the very last time I was with him, Kripalu, I don't know if you know about Kripalu, but it was a wonderful retreat center in Massachusetts, and they had a big hoo-ha when the Amrit Desai, the guru, parted ways with the group there in Massachusetts, and there was deep division, a lot of anger, this side, that side. And I was seeing a woman who had lived there many years, and she was now with me in New Haven. So I said, you know, maybe Ram Dass should go up there, and that would help, you know, heal him. and so she said, well, I wouldn't know how to do it. And I said, call him up. So I gave her his number, and there was a part of me that was kind of getting off on, you know, how she was freaking out. So she calls Ram Dass, and he answered the phone. She goes, blah, 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 blah. So she's talking to Ram Dass, and she tells him, could he go up there? And he didn't give her a firm answer. So later we heard he was going to be in Maho Bay, this deal, that a wonderful thing that Omega Institute used to do in the Caribbean. And so we said, well, let's go down to Maho Bay and we'll recruit him. And we'll go to this Omega thing. So we go down to Maho Bay. You have to take the thing from St. John, the ferry, and then a bus ride thing up to Maho Bay. And so we're up there, and it's all outdoors. A huge pavilion, all these raised sort of tent things where you stay. So we get some tea and we sit down. We hadn't been there 5 minutes. So I said, you think you're ready to talk to Ram Dass? And she said, well, I don't know. I said, well, you better. Here he comes. He came and sat right beside her. He came and sat down and gave her a... So she's like thrown into the mix again. And ultimately, we ended up talking Ram Dass into going to Kripalu. And I took him, I went to New York, picked him up, and drove him all the way up to Kripalu. And he did a big event with like 300 people. And I thought I would just sort of deliver him and then, you know, just wait and give him a ride when he leaves. But, you know, he got there in the afternoon and came dinner and a bunch of people around him. He said, where's Paul? And so he wanted to have dinner. He wanted to have dinner every meal with me. He wanted somebody with him. So I got to sort of be his like buffer for the whole time he was there. And then I drove him back to Bridgeport and dropped him off at the train. He liked to just be dropped at a bus station or something. He just traveled around by himself. And that was the last time before he stroked that I was with him. And then after, you know, I saw him a number of times. But then one other thing, when I was in Big Sur and all the times that I was there, we're in good shape. We got time. We're gonna do questions in a minute, by the way, and I hope to finish up about a half hour, and that'll be a good time for everybody. What was I saying? Oh, one of the great things with these little black tapes, these little cassette tapes, and you know how you're doing good service here, and you're all doing different things. You're serving in different ways. Well, people around Ram Dass, well, what can I do? And so they would record him with crude machines, and they would just record him. And then they'd reproduce these things and sell them at cost. And they'd buy boxes of these little blank cassette tapes, and they'd sell these Ram Dass tapes for like $2.50. And we just listened to them all the time. And it's wonderful. They're transcribing those now through the Ram Dass Foundation, Love, Serve, Remember, and now they're being digitized so you can listen to them. You can listen to them now. But these cassette tapes were being produced, and these guys in Santa Cruz, I used to go by and see them, and they're reproducing them and selling them for $2.50. And then they found out people were buying Ram Dass tapes and erasing them to record music. And the reason was they were cheaper than they could get them at the store. So when they got word of that, they advertised that tapes cost $2.50 with Ram Dass or blank. So people would order Ram Dass tape and 3 blanks. And that's how they got out there so much, so the tapes. And I used to write him notes. I don't know how I knew where to write him, but I'd write him from Big Sur, and I'd always get a reply. always these little cool little messages, and they were really, some of them were just mind-boggling. They were just, transformative. And I've lost most of them, but I've got a number of them over here on those little frames. I dug them up somewhere, and so I put them in those frames so you can read some of the notes that Ram Dass wrote me over the years. So I'm going to say, Ram Dass would always end by saying, Namaste. I honored the place in you that is the same as the place in me where we both meet. So I say, Namaste, y'all.
Yeah, you're right.
So.